You are not listening to these words by accident. Something in you has been moving toward this moment for a long time. The way a migrating bird finds a coastline it has never consciously seen, yet somehow remembers. On the surface, it may look like a random click, a late-night scroll, another video about men who won't commit. But in the language of depth psychology, we would call this synchronicity, an outer event that meaningfully coincides with an inner need, as if the unconscious has orchestrated a meeting between your question and this exact response. For a long time, your life may have looked relatively normal from the outside. You woke up, went to work, tended to friendships and responsibilities, learned how to carry yourself with competence. You built a persona, the Jungian term, for the social mask that lets us function in the world, the version of you who knows how to be kind, understanding, accommodating, not too much. The persona is not a lie. It is simply incomplete. It hides as much as it reveals. And for a while, this mask worked well enough. You could fold your longing into the background and tell yourself you were fine. Then came the man who says, "I don't want anything serious, but I want to see you." He appears, disappears, returns as if nothing happened, and each time your heart both lifts and sinks. On the surface, it looks like a relationship problem, a question of mixed signals and confusing behavior. But on a deeper level, this dynamic is a crack in the persona, an invitation from the unconscious. The pattern hurts precisely because it touches something older, something that has always been there but never had words. His contradiction pulls at your own. Jung would say that what is not made conscious returns as fate. At first, you might have called this bad luck in love or told yourself that this is just how modern men are. Yet if you listen carefully to your body, you notice that every time his name appears on your screen, after days or weeks of silence, something happens inside you. Your chest tightens, your stomach flips, time stretches. You're standing at a psychological threshold. Part of you rushes forward. Perhaps the hopeful girl who still believes this time will be different, and another part pulls back, whispering that you are walking barefoot over broken glass again. This threshold moment is the beginning of individuation, the Jungian term for the process by which the ego, your conscious, I begins to relate to something larger and wiser within you, which Jung called the self. The self is not your persona, not your wounds, not your roles. It is the organizing center of your psyche, the deep intelligence that keeps sending you the same lesson in different forms until you finally turn toward it. When the same type of man keeps appearing, the unconscious is no longer subtle. It is as if life is saying, "Look here. This is not just about him. This is about you meeting yourself." From the outside, it seems obvious if he doesn't want a relationship, you should simply walk away. But if it were that simple, you would not still be here. The truth is that your attachment is not only to this man, it is to the story that organizes your inner world. Somewhere beneath your reasoning mind lives an image of love that you did not choose, a pattern woven out of childhood experiences, cultural myths, the collective unconscious that shapes what women are taught to endure in the name of romance. The man who comes close, pulls away, then returns is not only himself, he is also an archetypal figure, a carrier of an ancient drama between the masculine and the feminine. On a soul level, you feel that there is more happening between you than his words admit. His body leans in, his eyes soften, the energy in the room thickens with unspoken truth, and your nervous system registers all of it. Here, we touch another Jungian idea. The unconscious does not speak primarily in concepts, but in images, sensations, and symbolic patterns. Your mind hears, "I don't want anything serious." Your body hears, "There is something here that he cannot yet face." Both are true, but they belong to different layers of reality. The crack in your persona opens wider each time you try to force yourself into one extreme or the other, either accepting casual crumbs in the hope they will magically turn into devotion, or cutting him off in a blaze of self-protection, while a part of you still waits for his return. The deeper conflict is not actually between you and him. It is between the woman you have been trained to be and the woman who is trying to be born through this very pain. One lives in fear of abandonment. The other is beginning to sense an inner authority that no man's ambivalence can define or diminish. This is why we must approach this situation not as a problem to be fixed quickly, but as an initiation. An initiation always begins with a rupture in the old order, the moment when what used to work no longer works, when the story you told about yourself begins to crumble. His "I don't want anything serious, but I want to see you" is not just a sentence. It is a doorway into a liminal space where the rules of your old life no longer hold, and the deeper intelligence of the psyche begins to move. You may not have noticed it at first, but something subtle began to shift the moment his words clashed with his actions. A contradiction of that magnitude, desire without commitment, longing without responsibility, has a way of loosening the seams of the conscious mind. Jung wrote that the psyche becomes porous in moments of emotional tension. The unconscious pushes upward, leaking through cracks created by confusion, disappointment, or unfulfilled longing. This is the beginning of the liminal phase, the in-between world, where you can no longer return to who you were, but you have not yet become who you are meant to be. In the liminal state, the familiar dissolves. Time loses its usual rhythm. Days stretch out when he is distant, then collapse into a single breath when he reappears. You may feel strangely disoriented, more sensitive, more intuitive, more vulnerable, as if you are walking through life with your skin removed. This isn't weakness, it is permeability. The threshold of transformation always begins by softening the ego so that deeper truths can rise. The liminal space is the psychic equivalent of twilight, a place where your inner landscape becomes visible in new ways. Here in this half-light, something inside you begins to stir, a whisper from the unconscious. Look closer. Beneath your surface emotions lies the deeper truth that Jung called the shadow. The shadow is everything the persona has learned to banish: anger, disappointment, the hunger for reciprocity, the longing to be seen without having to earn it. These feelings are not shameful. They are vital parts of your psyche asking to be acknowledged. But before the shadow reveals itself fully, the psyche often descends into an underworld of sorts, the emotional basement where old patterns, forgotten memories, and ancestral wounds live. You might notice dreams becoming more vivid images of water night staircases or unfinished rooms. These are classic symbols of the unconscious, preparing you for a deeper encounter. Jung observed in countless analyses that when a woman is entangled with an unavailable or ambivalent man, her psyche is not merely suffering, it is signaling. The external man mirrors an internal figure, one that has existed long before him. Here we encounter a profound and often painful revelation. The man who cannot commit is often a gateway to the father complex. This complex is not necessarily about your literal father, though it can be. More fundamentally, it is the internalized image of the masculine authority, protection, recognition, the sense of being valued without condition. When that image is fractured or inconsistent, the psyche often seeks out men who echo its instability. Not because you desire the pain, but because the unconscious wants resolution. The unavailable man reactivates the old wound not to punish you, but to free you. As you descend deeper into the underworld, you begin noticing that your attachment to him is not only about him, it is also about the part of you that still seeks proof of worthiness, the hope that if this man finally chooses you, something ancient inside will be healed. Jung would say that the libido, the psychological life force, has been fixated on an archetypal pattern that now demands your attention. The returning, retreating man awakens not merely desire, but the forgotten ache of a younger self who longed for consistent love and never fully received it. This is the moment of confrontation not with him, but with the part of yourself that has lived in exile. You may feel anger rising like fire in the belly or grief pooling silently in the chest. Let it come. These emotions are not regressions, they are revelations. The shadow surfaces not to disrupt your life, but to restore the fullness of your being. Only by meeting these inner figures, the abandoned girl, the silenced woman, the dutiful persona, can you begin the alchemy that Jung called individuation. And in this underworld, something else emerges, the ancestral feminine, the lineage of women whose stories you carry in your blood. You may sense their presence as intuition, as sudden clarity, as a feeling that you are not walking this path alone. Their unmet longings, their unspoken wounds, their survival instincts and wisdom all rise within you. This is not imagination. It is the collective unconscious entering your personal story, guiding you toward a threshold your foremothers were not permitted to cross. The descent is not the end. It is the preparation for transformation, because what waits below is not destruction, but discovery. As you move deeper into this interior landscape, a new awareness begins to flicker, faint at first, like a candle flame seen through thick glass. It is the awareness that the man who drifts toward you and then away is not simply a disruptor of your peace. He is an emissary from the unconscious, carrying a message you could not have received any other way. His inconsistency awakens a truth that lay dormant within you, a truth about your relationship to the masculine, both inner and outer. Jung called this inner masculine the animus, the archetype of logos, discernment, direction, and sovereignty. When the animus is wounded, neglected, or unintegrated, it manifests outwardly through relationships with men who mirror its fragmentation. This is why his ambivalence feels strangely familiar. It touches the very place where your own animus has been uncertain, split, or exiled. Part of you knows exactly what you deserve: devotion, presence, reciprocity, and another part of you doubts it deeply. In him, these two currents collide, the part that desires you and the part that fears what desire demands. In you, the same collision stirs a longing for intimacy, entwined with a fear of being too much, wanting too much, or losing something essential if you ask for what you truly need. This is where the descent reaches its turning point. For beneath the emotional turbulence lies a deeper psychological truth. The ambivalent man is not merely withholding commitment, he is also illuminating the parts of your psyche that have long been waiting to come into their own. The shadow you met earlier begins to take shape not only as pain but as power, the anger that reveals your boundaries, the grief that reveals your capacity for depth, the longing that reveals your capacity for eros in its truest sense. Jung used the word eros not simply to describe romantic attraction, but to name the connective principle of the psyche, the force that binds, relates, and generates meaning. You begin to see that your longing for him is not a weakness. It is eros seeking a vessel worthy of its depth. The suffering arises not because you love too deeply, but because you offered that depth to someone standing at the threshold of his own unconscious, unable or unwilling to cross. Yet, even this has a purpose. The psyche often draws us toward those who cannot meet us so that we can finally meet ourselves. Through the disappointment, through the ache of unmet reciprocity, your eros begins to turn homeward, seeking its rightful place within you. This internal turning is subtle at first. You notice it in moments when the fog clears and you feel a quiet clarity in your chest. You sense it when you realize that your worth is not diminished by his confusion. You hear it in the sudden, unexpected thought, perhaps the love I am seeking from him is actually the love I am meant to cultivate within myself. This is not self-help sentiment, it is psychological truth. When eros turns inward, it reconnects you with the self, the deep guiding center of your being that Jung described as the totality of who you are and the blueprint of who you are becoming. As eros returns to the self, you begin to feel a new kind of energy rising in you, creative, intuitive, fierce in its softness. You may notice a sudden urge to write, to paint, to move your body in ways that feel ancient and liberating. You may feel drawn to solitude, not as an escape, but as a sanctuary. These impulses are your psyche reclaiming its libido, the life force that was once tethered to the impossible task of earning someone's certainty. Freed from that burden, it begins to circulate through your system like living fire. And as this fire grows, a startling realization dawns: the man who could not choose you has unknowingly awakened qualities in you that no committed lover might have stirred so early: your intuition, your discernment, your longing for truth, your refusal to abandon yourself again. His inconsistency carved out space within you where sovereignty could begin to grow. This is the paradox at the heart of every initiation. The wound becomes the womb of transformation. In this space, the father complex begins to loosen. The old reflex to seek masculine approval before trusting your own knowing begins to dissolve. You feel a quiet shift inside. You are no longer looking outward to be chosen. You are beginning to choose yourself. And in the psyche, this is a tectonic reorientation. The moment a woman stops seeking the father's gaze in the faces of men, her animus begins to transform from a critical, withholding shadow figure into an ally, a source of inner authority, clarity, and direction. The underworld that once felt like darkness now reveals itself as fertile soil. Something is growing there, something that belongs only to you. As the inner soil softens, something long buried begins to rise, not suddenly, not dramatically, but with the slow inevitability of dawn. It is your own authority, not the brittle kind that compensates for insecurity, not the sharp-edged strength forged through self-protection, but the quiet, resonant knowing that emerges when a woman no longer abandons herself. This shift does not announce itself with fanfare. It appears first in the smallest of moments, a pause before responding to his message, a clarity in your breath when you feel the old, anxious longing begin to stir, a subtle sense that your center is no longer located in his attention, but in your own rib cage, steady and warm. This is the beginning of psychological sovereignty, the stage Jung described as the ego turning toward the self. Up until now, your longing, your hope, your fear have all been oriented toward the external man, the literal figure whose inconsistency kept you off balance. But as the animus aligns within you and eros returns to its source, your psychic gravity shifts. The self becomes the axis around which your inner world organizes. You are no longer orbiting someone else's uncertainty. In this phase, you begin to sense what Jung meant when he said that the psyche is self-regulating like a living ecosystem. Each disappointment, each unmet promise, each silence from him was not simply a relational wound, it was information. A message from the unconscious, pointing you back to your own neglected territories. This is why your body reacted so strongly each time he withdrew. Your nervous system wasn't only mourning the absence of a man, it was mourning the abandonment of your own truth. And now, as the truth begins to return, your body recognizes it before your mind does. The somatic shifts are unmistakable. Your breath deepens, your shoulders drop. There is a sensation, faint at first, of being held from within. You may find yourself sleeping differently, dreaming more vividly, or feeling an inexplicable pull toward nature music or silence. These are signs that the psyche is recalibrating. The energy once bound in anxious waiting is becoming available for other forms of life, creativity, and presence. Jung believed that the libido, once freed from a fixation, naturally flows toward individuation, fueling the emergence of new capacities, new desires, new ways of being. It is during this reorientation that many women feel a sudden loneliness, but it is not the loneliness of abandonment. It is the loneliness of altitude. When consciousness expands, the world below can feel farther away. Patterns that once defined you no longer fit. You see things with startling clarity, and clarity can feel like solitude. But it is a sacred solitude, a threshold solitude. It is the space in which your old identity dissolves and the new one is not yet formed. This is the phase mystics and initiates across cultures, knew intimately the wandering in the desert, the 3 days in the underworld, the retreat to the mountain. In psychological terms, it is the withdrawal of projection. The energy you once placed onto him, the longing, the hope, the idealization returns to you. And as it returns, You begin to see him as he is, rather than as the symbolic figure your unconscious needed him to be. His contradictions no longer feel mysterious. His silences no longer feel like judgments. His returns no longer feel like destiny. He becomes what he always was, a man standing at the threshold of his own inner conflict, whose dance with you illuminated your own. In this clearing, the feminine lineage becomes unmistakably present. You may feel it in sudden flashes of intuition, in the sense that you are unwinding not only your own patterns, but those inherited through generations of women who were taught to make themselves small for the sake of love. Jung called this the collective unconscious, the shared psychic reservoir containing the experiences, wounds, and wisdom of humanity. And within that collective, the feminine unconscious holds centuries of silenced truths. As you rise not only for yourself, but for them. Your healing sends ripples outward through invisible corridors of psyche and lineage. Every time you choose yourself, every time you refuse to collapse back into the old pattern, you break a link in a chain older than your own life. This realization is both humbling and electrifying. You begin to sense that your journey with this man, or with all the men who came before him, was never simply about romance. It was about evolution. It was about the psyche using the language of desire to draw you into a deeper encounter with your own soul. And as your soul awakens, something extraordinary happens. Your relationship to love itself transforms. Love no longer feels like a negotiation or a performance. It no longer hinges on someone else's readiness. It becomes a force that flows from you rather than toward someone who cannot receive it. You do not close, you expand. You do not harden, you clarify. You do not protect yourself from love. You protect love from those who cannot meet it. This is the moment when the old spell breaks. The man's ambivalence no longer seduces or destabilizes you. You can feel compassion for his fear without trying to rescue him from it. You can feel the pull of chemistry without confusing it for destiny. You can feel tenderness without abandoning discernment. You can hold the connection without losing the thread of yourself. This is the altitude of consciousness Jung spoke of, when the ego no longer seeks fusion, validation, or escape, but alignment with the self. Here, love is no longer a question of being chosen. It is the natural overflow of a psyche in harmony with its own depths. And from this altitude, everything looks different. From this heightened vantage, something profound begins to settle in your consciousness. What once felt like an emotional labyrinth constructed by the man's contradictions now appears as a symbolic map, a map that has been guiding you toward the center of your own being all along. You realize that the story was never primarily about him. He was a catalyst, a mirror, a threshold figure. But the true protagonist of this inner drama has always been you. And this shift from fixation on the outer object to recognition of the inner subject marks the beginning of genuine individuation. In this final phase, you begin to sense the contours of the self more clearly than ever before. Jung described the self not as an ideal version of the personality, but as the totality of your psychic life. The wholeness that includes your light and shadow, your instinct and intuition, your wounds and wisdom. When the ego aligns with the self, a woman enters a state of deep coherence. She moves through the world with a clarity that doesn't require explanation, with a presence that doesn't demand permission. Her choices come from a place beneath thought, a place that feels like truth rising from the bones. It is here that the masculine within you, the animus now transformed, becomes an ally rather than a saboteur. Instead of whispering doubt or criticism, it begins to offer structure, perspective, direction. It helps you articulate your boundaries without aggression, express your desires without apology, and walk away from confusion without collapsing into self-blame. The feminine within you, eros, intuition, receptivity, begins to trust itself again. The two principles, once at war, now begin to dance in harmony. This inner union is the psychological counterpart to sacred marriage, the hieros gamos, the symbolic integration of opposites that ancient traditions saw as the foundation of spiritual maturity. With this inner union comes a new kind of freedom, one that feels both exhilarating and unnervingly quiet. You notice that your nervous system no longer leaps at the sound of his message tone. The ache that once lived beneath your ribs has dissolved, replaced by a spacious neutrality. Not indifference, never indifference, but clarity. You can see him now with unclouded eyes, a man split between desire and fear, capable of connection, yet terrified of what connection might require. You can feel compassion without contracting warmth, without being pulled back into the old orbit. And perhaps for the first time, you can see the deeper truth. You are no longer asking him to save. You choose you or complete you. You are no longer making him the gatekeeper of your worth. In stepping away from that posture, you step into a new relationship with life itself. Possibility opens. Desire becomes creative rather than anxious. You begin to sense the kind of relationship that actually aligns with your newly integrated self, one marked not by pursuit or uncertainty, but by reciprocity, presence, and shared depth. A relationship shaped not by wounds seeking resolution, but by two sovereign beings meeting at the crossroads of their individuation. And when such a relationship arrives, whether through his transformation or through another man entirely, you will meet it from a wholly different place. You will meet it as the woman who has walked through the underworld, who has confronted her shadow, who has reclaimed her anima and animus, who carries the wisdom of her feminine lineage, who knows her worth with the quiet certainty of a mountain knowing its own height. You will meet it as a woman no longer ruled by fear, no longer hypnotized by ambivalence, no longer diminished by someone else's limitations. This is why the journey mattered, why the ache mattered, why his mixed signals mattered. They were not punishments, but prophecies, signs pointing you toward the depths you were always meant to explore. What he could not give you forced you to discover in yourself, the very qualities you had projected onto him: strength, clarity, stability, love. And in reclaiming them, you step into your own mythic center. A final truth emerges. The moment you stop seeking your reflection in someone else's eyes, you become luminous enough to see the self for who it truly is, the quiet, inexhaustible source of all the love you thought you had to earn. If this journey has stirred something in you, if you recognize yourself in these words, consider joining this exploration more deeply. Like, share, and subscribe to support this ongoing study of Jungian depth psychology and feminine consciousness. Leave a comment if you feel called. Your voice becomes part of the collective evolution, a signal to other women walking this same path.